as they arrive. In the interest of time, I do want to honor everybody's presence, especially if they were punctual. So again, thank you so much for being here. Good evening, members of the Southeast Guiding Coalition, our community at large, and our guests. I want to welcome you to one of the many series of bi-weekly meetings that we've had. Thank you for being here. We know it is an intense time commitment, but we appreciate your commitment, your devotion, your dedication to the process in the interest of our students. I am also very excited about the progress we've made so far in the discussions that will culminate in best case scenario in program placement and boundary adjustment for our students. We have a very short runway, so I am believing that tonight we are going to arrive at some consensus and we'll be able to, on the 17th of February, have some recommendations to Deputy Superintendent Clare. That said, I also want to welcome our partners, Jed and Flow Analytics, Karina and Brick Architectural Firm. They've been with us through the many meetings we've had and the sub-meetings and the pre-meetings and all the meetings you can possibly imagine. We really appreciate your dedication, your guidance, your intuitiveness, and your knowledge about the processes that we have to engage in. We welcome you as well. In our last meeting, we worked on the placement of the Spanish and Chinese programs, conducted an informal poll to get a pulse on people's thoughts, and received some feedback on boundaries. Some of this work was done in breakout groups. Tonight, we will continue those conversations. We will also hear from two principals who are representative voices of our principal groups. Our principal groups meet every Monday to have conversations around the charge that the board has placed in front of us. And we'll also hear from Shanice on her extended community engagement practice. This is, again, a result of your input around wanting to hear from a lot of our community members who have not been heard from. That said, next slide, please. Our land acknowledgement.
Recording in progress.
Hey, Marnie, would you mind stopping the music? All right, go ahead, Dr. O.
All right, thank you. Our land acknowledgement and anti-oppression statement is central to the work that we do. And at PPS, we strive to strengthen our relationship with the Native community and Native nations. It is a symbol of this commitment, as a symbol of this commitment is our land acknowledgement. These statements bring visibility to the First Peoples of our collective home. This statement is meant to provide information and context while also encouraging all of us to reflect on our current day relationship with Native people and Native experiences. We'd like to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of the Chinook, the Clackamas, the Kalapuya, the Multnomah, the Wasco, the Cathlamet, the Tualatin, and the Malala peoples. We also know that many other tribes made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We honor their history and acknowledge the sacrifices they've made. Let us also acknowledge the robust present-day federally recognized tribes of this area, the Grand Ronds, the Slits, and the Cowlets. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the Chinook Nation. They've been seeking federal recognition for many years. The urban Indian community is made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country, representing 400 tribes. The urban Indian community has a vivid history made up of people whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking more opportunities. Next slide, please. Today, these tribes and communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that would be greatly admired by their ancestors. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve students and families representing more than 150 tribal nations within our education system. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization on our students, all students today, and make visible the multitude of Native families and many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. We encourage every person to reflect on their own history, understand the history of colonization and genocide, and support Indigenous sovereignty priorities and actions. This acknowledgement is one step that we can take to improve our support of Indigenous communities in the area. In addition to acknowledging the land and those that have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can begin to heal. Next slide, please. Tonight, we're going to focus on a number of areas. We're going to listen to the engagement update. The engagement update will be presented by Shanice. We are also going to hear from our principal reps. Again, they are representative voices of the principal group. We will talk about our program placement options, and we'll also talk about the boundary analysis. Again, our goal is to make sure that we do have a recommendation by the end of the February 17 meeting, which is upon us really. So we don't have much runway left. So our goal tonight is to be very focused to arrive at some kind of decision that can be moved forward. Next slide, please. That said, Ms. Karina.
Thank you, Dr. O. Welcome everyone. So yes, I just want to invite you all, like I said, take a moment, ground yourselves a little bit. If you can, peek outside the window, because we do have a beautiful little Cheshire cat looking at us in terms of the crescent moon. But take a look at the group agreements in front of us, right? Tonight, I think as we try to reach consensus and as we try to kind of bring this home, it's important for us to really honor the work and the way that we said we would be in community with each other. Let us know always in the chat, or just open up your mic, raise your hand if there's anything else you need this evening to be able to participate with your full self. Also remember, next slide, Barney, that we will not be able to listen live. Anyone that's listening to the public recording won't be able to listen live, but we will be recording all of the small groups when we break into them, and they'll be available on the website tomorrow. Also, you should have gotten notification that we are recording the meeting tonight. Next. What we wanted to do though is celebrate, because oftentimes it can feel as you get to the end of or nearing the end of a process, and there's still kind of some open questions, like what have we accomplished in the time that we were together? And so we wanted to take a moment to really sort of celebrate what we have accomplished and where we have achieved consensus to date. So the first of those is that we have found a home for the Harrison Park K-5 neighborhood and Chinese DLI program that will move to Clark, which will then allow Creative Science to move in and join the Bridger neighborhood. We've also reached consensus around the location of Chinese DLI, and the neighborhood will co-locate and continue at Woodstock. We have finally reached consensus around the fact that we are bringing our elementary DLI program strands from wherever they are to join up at middle school to have one language program per middle school. So we are that goal that we talked about when we looked at the numbers of trying to consolidate and create consolidate languages at the middle level is something we've been able to accomplish. So celebrate yourselves for that. And then we'll turn the page to talk a little bit about where we still need to go. All right, so next slide. Yeah, so we're nearing consensus, right? There are still sort of two main outstanding questions relative to program placement, which is where is K-5, where are the K-5 Spanish Immersion or DLI programs going to be located? And then where the placement is for immersion programs at the middle school level. So those are the two kind of big program placement questions we still have before us. And then once we have those kind of behind us, then we started to have conversations last time around in one of our breakout groups around what are some neighborhood program feeder patterns and how can we make boundary line adjustments in a way that kind of best met kind of our goals and objectives and the directives that the board gave us. And so there's still a little bit more refinement of that once we sort of narrow down our program placements. So that's kind of the work that we have ahead of us. So with that, I believe we are going to, next slide, to Shanice, because we've also, I know the district has been working hard, site principals have been working hard to get some engagement, and I will have Shanice provide that update.
Yes, so we want to incorporate more voices and have more voices represented, especially folks who are disproportionately impacted by the changes we're working through, and wanted to have focus on a few school communities. So another key piece is focusing on neighborhood program family input, especially from Lent, Bridger, and Harrison Park. And this is representative of what we were able to discover in about 1 week. And so this will be also a part of the survey update that will be shared with folks as well. But what is represented here and what we were able to learn last week was having this value on teacher administrators and that access to co-curricular activities and access to teachers who can support learning behavior and child development. And the whole school model, in terms of having a DLI whole school model, is something that folks are supportive of. Parents also articulated a value for having a diversity of students at their programs and acknowledge that there can be value in having both models. So that's represented in these comments here. And also at Harrison Park, there was feedback from families around not wanting too much of a populated school and liking the idea of a DLI program at their school, and maintaining a DLI program at Harrison Park.
Thank you, Shanice. I think this is definitely feedback that we wanted to get back from the group, right? And so wanting to ensure that the community had an opportunity to be heard, to essentially talk about where we are. And so getting back to kind of what are the pieces that we still have to kind of get consensus around, right? So we know, like I said, that we talked about this the last time we were all together, that there were that actually what we saw as we were taking the poll was that there was some shifting of where people landed, right? And what some of the priorities were. And so maybe as we start to bring forward those points, we'll have an opportunity to kind of engage in that conversation a little bit more tonight, both in small groups and in the work that we're doing together. So we'll continue on with kind of the engagement report that we had, building upon that. Anyone have any questions for Shanice? Any questions that you heard based on the feedback from the community? Just raise your hand or throw me a comment in the chat. Not see. Oh, Elizabeth.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for this information, Shanice. I think it's really helpful for the conversation. Is it possible to put kind of a summary of the organizations engaged with and who participated, somewhere we can just see the context in the background of this?
Absolutely. So I mentioned we focus on lunch in Harrison Park and neighborhood families, especially. You know, we had a DLI specific space at Harrison Park in addition, but can share that information. And I shared, I see Beth asked in the chat how many parents were we able to reach. And I think we made contact with about 60 parents or so. And, you know, it's started about a week ago.
Hold on. Thank you. Okay, anyone else have any other questions? Okay. Next up, we have our co-chair corner. So I'm going to invite both Beth and Adrielle to join us and share some comments from the co-chairs.
Hello. The co-chair corner information was based on a compilation of information from conversations that Beth and I had, and or questions or comments that we found in Discord. So I just want to put them out there, put these little ticklers out so that we can begin to discuss them as a group, or get the answers that you need somewhere throughout this evening or via email. So I had a few conversations with different people over the last couple of weeks. And one of the things that was overwhelmingly mentioned was, will PPS be able to commit to services in schools with shifts? So if we're able to get to a consensus, parents are asking to identify a plan for PPS that will allow services to be dispatched to spaces that are going to have shifts, but also having some of those resources that are needed for underrepresented minorities in these spaces as well, to boost whatever support needs there are shifting from neighborhood to neighborhood, from whatever schools or whatever spaces. So is there a commitment available, and can we see a plan for that? There was
particularly when we are seeing like a disparity in staffing.
Thank you, Beth. And then additionally, I think everybody was a little surprised about the poll switch from the beginning to the end. And so really just trying to figure out what were the key factors that caused that. Were there errors, wanting to dig a little bit deeper into that, or just get some clarity on how many people were surprised. And I think that, you know, I can say in this space that everyone was surprised about that. So the voices that are in Discord, the voices that I've talked to on the phone, additionally with Beth, everybody is concerned about that and hoping to come to a consensus that will maintain from the beginning to the end, should we do polling again this week. Lent standing in E-Series, will Lent be a neighborhood DIL similar to Sunnyside? So wanting to know the standing of Lents in the E-Series, are they going to be neighborhood assigned, or will it be neighborhood lottery? Like, what is that going to look like? There was some confusion about that. So if Karina or Judy, if one of you can maybe close the loop on that to make sure that it's abundantly clear, because I think there was some back and forth on that on Discord. We talked about the outreach results, and Shanice has agreed to make it available for people to look at. Just some feelings that the loudest voice is being heard, that schools that there seems to be an impression that one school is prioritized over another, that voices that are being heard in this space are seeming to be the majority. And so just wanting to make sure that we clarify that we're trying to be as balanced as we can. We understand that there are voices that are constantly heard with good reason. And we want to make sure we honor those voices, but we're also aware that there are people who maybe are shy, uncomfortable speaking up. And we get a lot of those emails, Beth and I, but also people wanting to make sure that there isn't a favorite school or a favored position, and we don't have that. We're just trying to get to the best place, serve as many people, as many families as we can. And then just a social media reminder. I mean, there's a lot of conversation on social media, and it's important for us to remember that our voices are our voices, not the voices necessarily of a community. We need to make sure that we clarify, if you are SEGC, that you are speaking for yourself, not for SEGC, because we want to make sure that we're not giving the false impression that some people, even though their voices are strong and their opinions are valid and their truths are their truths, we don't want to generalize and make it seem that that truth is backed wholly by this collaboration or this collective. Did I miss anything, Beth?
I think that covers it. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone have any questions, further comments? I know Claire's gonna speak to some of the questions that you had for her about Lent and the PPS commitment, but before we get to those, does anyone have any questions for Adriel or Beth? Raise your hand, put something in the chat. I saw that there was a question about whether or not there was were co-chair corner this since our last meeting, and Beth responded that no, there had not been. Okay, not seeing any hands or any chat. So go ahead, Deputy Superintendent Hertz.
Sure. In terms of questions about PPS ability to commit to services when schools to enrollment shift. So certainly the student need of a school dictates the services the school will receive for the students that are there. And so one thing I would say is the Southeast Guidance Coalition can incorporate that into a recommendation as a part of their recommendation. So showing your wanting to recommend that the services need for, especially I'm thinking racial equity partners is kind of what the services were, but Adriel would have to make sure I'm getting answering the question that she asked or brought forward. And so yes, so I would say that should be incorporated in your recommendation as like an opening line that or as a component of something that you want to ensure happens for the students as the enrollment shifts are made.
Do you want to clarify the Lent model that is being considered or that was proposed?
So the Lent model is having both, well, we would combine the immediate and then the long-term are of course different, but we would combine the two programs now and create, I'm thinking this is the whole school model is what is being said here.
Correct.
And so with the whole school model, we would combine all the students now, and then certainly the neighborhood students that lived in Lent would have first priority. We wouldn't want to say it's too full for them because they can walk to the neighborhood school, and then we would continue to bring in from the region the students that certainly are interested in that DLI, whole school DLI model. So then more of a lottery-based system for the remaining pieces or remaining spaces in the building, student spots.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Claire, Adriel did clarify that it is ResJ as well as other specific needs, including specifically special needs, right, to support of those families as well. Okay. Adriel and Beth, any other questions for Claire before I move us on? Okay. And then we thought it would be a good opportunity to provide some sort of principal perspective, for lack of a better term, folks that kind of have been wrestling with some of these issues. We know you've been asking to hear with a little bit more sort of clarity from Portland Public Schools and from educators. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. O, to introduce principals from your area.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Once again, I am very excited to introduce Richard Smith. Richard Smith is the current principal at Kellogg and was the principal at Lent for a few years prior to taking on the assignment at Kellogg. So he will be speaking as a representative voice of a group of principals on their perspectives about the placement of instructional programs. The other principal that I'm going to be introducing is Kathy Murray. Kathy Murray is a K-5 principal at Marysville. She's been at Marysville for upwards of 7 years. So she knows the school inside and out. And she also will be speaking to program placement, which is as a result of a collective voice of principals that they've been working with. So whoever wants to go first.
All right, I'll dive in first if that's okay, Kathy. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. O, for the introduction. My name is Richard Smith. I use pronouns he, him, and I am currently the principal at Kellogg Middle School. So I'm going to speak to some principal perspective, and it's not just my perspective. I will say a lot of this does reflect my perspective, but it's also the perspective of the group. And so we put together a bit of a statement that I'm going to read from a bit here. And so last week, the principals of the schools included in Southeast Guiding Coalition process gathered together virtually to talk about the 2 program shifts and where we stood with these. These program shifts were to consider either Spanish or Chinese DLI at Kellogg and whether Lent would be served well as a full Spanish immersion K-5. We did consider multiple perspectives, data points, and scenarios. And so I'm going to specifically speak to where we landed with Kellogg, and then Kathy will speak to where we landed with Lent. And so after careful consideration, the majority of the principals did agree that Kellogg as a Spanish immersion school would be the best case scenario. And I'm going to kind of go through some reasons why. And so we looked at both the Chinese DLI scenario and the Spanish DLI scenario. We considered the PPS stated goal of 500 students in middle school, the current reality of Kellogg and Harrison Park, K-8, community letters voices from both Kellogg Middle School and Bridger, as well as our own unique perspectives to how schools are built and function. We do have a unique perspective being principals in those buildings on a daily basis. And so we do know that Kellogg was staffed to help Spanish immersion from the beginning. There was some intentionality built around that. 2 out of 3 of the building administrators are Latina. 2 out of 3 of the building administrators are bilingual. The front office staff is bilingual. The community agents bilingual. The school climate specialist is bilingual. And many teachers not teaching DLI classes are also bilingual. Some items here. When a program change occurs in Portland Public, the PAT teachers associated with that change of program are the only ones transferred. So in this case, just the 3 DLI teachers would transfer over with the program. And that would really be it. The rest of the positions don't necessarily transfer. In addition to this, we have heard from Hosford Middle School that there are not many staff associated with the Chinese DLI program outside of the DLI teachers. From a staffing perspective, we believe students and communities in the Spanish DLI program from Southeast Portland will be better served at Kellogg Middle School, but not just for staffing. Some statistics is of the 103 students currently served by the Kellogg Middle School Spanish Immersion Program, 69% of these students identify as Latin or Latinx, and 4% of these students identify as Black. Of the 153 students in the Kellogg Immersion Program now, 95% of them qualify for free or reduced lunch. And then at Hosford, 11% of the 117 students in the Chinese Immersion Program qualify for free and reduced lunch. So we're also seeing from an equity lens, it makes sense to not move the Spanish Immersion Program from Kellogg based off some of this data. And we also do understand, and we know that there are unintended consequences of keeping Spanish immersion at Kellogg and adding in an extra strand. And some of these that identified are potential overcrowding in 2025, as well as the fear of communities of needing to move boundaries that are not included in the Spanish immersion program that are currently enrolled at Kellogg. And as a principal group, we do believe in the importance of ensuring any communities that switch to other middle schools do have robust middle school programming. And we also believe in prioritizing proximity for the lowest income communities. We do believe that if schools are right sized, then students will have access to the robust programming that people are advocating for. And so we also looked at the numbers, and perspective that we had is that 700 is a comfortable number for Kellogg, and The 2025 number is around 724. And so we believe that those numbers were looked at a little more closely, that they actually would probably be closer to 700. And so to conclude about the Kellogg piece, as a principal, as principals of the group that have a unique perspective, we do believe that the Spanish DLI should be placed at Kellogg Middle School and that the Chinese DLI program should be placed at Harrison Park. We know it's not a perfect solution, but we do believe that it prioritizes equity and gives our students and families access to what they're asking for.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you. It's I'm glad to hear you say hello, everyone. I'm really nice to be able to talk to the whole group and not just in breakout groups. I feel like we sit back a lot, but we were grateful to have an opportunity to share just sort of the perspective of what we see as building sort of leaders and what we do with all the FTE and the student divisions. And we're wishing there was a perfect scenario. There's not. We've come to that consensus, at least when we're talking together, but strongly for the elementary school, and I'll speak to that now that I'm a K-5 principal for a year, is that need to make sure that neighborhood programs are at that 270 as much as possible, balancing that out with the number of students we have in Southeast. Getting neighborhood K-5s to that is really a key feeling for the principals involved. And so that also means in like those co-located elementary schools, the neighborhood programs still need to be able to be robustly populated with a number of students to have two good strands. So the other piece around that is that came up is the benefits of the whole school Spanish DLI model. And we've heard frequently about the benefits of having a whole school DLI. We recognize all of the principals are in agreement that single strand programs just do not offer the same amount of options and opportunities as you have at a multi-strand program. Moving to those whole school neighborhoods, bringing in and combining some of the DLI programs is going to offer these, more robust strands. With the benefits of that is that resources are focused strategically to close the opportunity gaps for the emergent bilingual students. All the hiring and staffing resources, which take up so much of the time and are really important to make the schools function the highest they can. They're dedicated specifically, as Richard was just saying, at Kellogg to the linguistic and cultural needs of the emergent bilingual students and families. There's a school-wide focus on increasing the academic success. School-wide professional development is focused on best practices. Everybody's combining together. You get greater teacher efficacy. The whole ship is moving in the same direction. So that's important for us. We also really believe in order for this to work, there has to be the power of the opt-out in a neighborhood DLI whole school model. So all students living in the boundary would have access to be part of the Spanish immersion program. And if they choose to opt out, then they would have access to another successful neighborhood school nearby. So that's sort of where we landed with looking at those benefits for providing a whole school option for a Spanish DLI program. Thank you for giving us this chance to talk.
Yeah, thank you, Richard and Kathy. Does anyone have any questions for Richard or Kathy? Got a quiet group tonight. Aha, Beth.
Thank you both for coming and reporting back and sharing your perspective. One of the questions that I have, for me, one of the biggest tension points that I've seen in citing particularly the middle school DLI programs is the challenge of ensuring robust enrollment and enrollment parity between Harrison Park and Kellogg to ensure that Harrison Park is set up to have the same kind of intentionally staffed, robust, equitable educational experience as what the students at Kellogg are receiving. And so that's the piece I didn't hear about is what was the principal's take on sort of that disparity between the two schools and what mitigation we might be able to consider to ensure that Harrison Park and the students there are getting what they need.
I can speak to my perspective. I think were you addressing me and Kathy on that? I'm assuming here. So when we look at the vision of what we're trying to do here, I believe 500 is the goal for the middle schools. The vision being that if we can get a school to 500, then they're going to get the programming that they need. And I believe in the scenario that we kind of looked at E1, for example, that Harrison Park is at about 550 in that. And so while Kellogg would be a bigger school, the numbers still reach there for that robust programming for middle school.
Okay. My understanding though, and maybe Judy or Claire, maybe Claire could speak to this, is that, or Esther, that more is better, and that the resources would not be the same in a building with 550 students as they would be in a building with 725 students.
Yes, and what I will say, Beth, is that Jed is going to come on board because we knew that was a concern from the whole group, right? That in a scenario where Spanish stayed at Kellogg, that there was concern about how to get more robust enrollment at Harrison Park. And so he will talk through some things that they've looked at to increase the enrollment at Harrison Park. So we'll get to that in a second, but I don't know anyone else. I don't know if it's Judy. I don't know if it's Claire. I know Leah's on the meeting tonight.
Yeah, I just got on. My apologies for being late. I was anyway. You don't want to hear.
I don't want to hear. So give us your perspective on
I am here now, and that's what matters. Let's just say runway walking and Lunar New Year, and maybe a torn meniscus, and that's been my afternoon. So that being said, I think one thing, there is a balance, and it depends on the ability to look at funding streams and all of those things. And 550, you can still potentially have a robust program, especially if you remain Title I. I'm going to put that out there as well. I have worked in a middle school of 1,000 students, and there is also a point where you get too large and you lose that ability to connect with kids and have staff really get to know students and know families. So there's also that to keep in mind as we look at this. And then the other piece is with middle school programming, there is also potential for us to look at other options to enroll or get enrollment up. And I'll just say that, we could potentially look at some other things that could increase enrollment. Not right now, but in the future.
Yes. Okay. One other question, and I'm not sure which of the three of you this, or if it is a question for the three of you, but one question that we got in the chat is, if neighborhood families are able to opt into Kellogg, how will they be brought up to speed if they don't have a history in the Spanish language?
Is this for Kellogg or Lent?
I think the question says Kellogg. They're able to opt into Kellogg.
So Kellogg's not a full school DLI in this model. And so it's only the students who are Immersion. They're still the neighborhood boundaries, and those students would not be in the DLI program.
Okay. And Adrielle, let us know if you meant Lent and not at Kellogg. Another question, and I'm not sure this is a question for you. This might be a question for Judy or Jed, but can someone review the capture rate data that was emailed out? Had a hard time drawing conclusions based on that data with some support around that.
Yeah, I can start with that one, and I'm actually going to speak to it a little bit on the next slide.
Yeah,
here.
why don't we go there?
Yeah,
Will you?
yeah.
Because I think that'll also answer some of this concern about the enrollment at Harrison Park. So thank you, Marty. All right.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I prepared this slide. Oh, and good evening, Jed Roberts. You all may remember me from many, many meetings. I just wanted to put this slide together to show folks how we're building up enrollment at Harrison Park and some of the options that are on the table to get a robust enrollment. And what you're seeing here is enrollment that would be based on a situation where that middle school Spanish DLI is located at Kellogg, and that we have K-5 Spanish DLI at Atkinson as a single strand and at Lent as a neighborhood-based whole school Spanish DLI that we've talked about in previous proposals. And so the way I've stacked this up here is kind of by foundation here, right? I think we've always talked about the Clark and Vestal neighborhoods really being the buoy of, or buoying the enrollment for Harrison Park. So out of our model, that, and based on the most recent boundaries that we've been working with, that's about 270 kids. We've also talked about the need, therefore, to also bring over Chinese DLI, all of Southeast Chinese DLI, to help us bolster enrollment there at Harrison Park. So with the existing program that's just matriculating up now into middle school, and the Woodstock-Hosford program, we're looking at an enrollment that's starting to get into the mid 400s there at about 440 students. Another piece of this that we've talked about is the Atkinson Neighborhood. Just kind of based on the locations of the middle schools. I know that we've noticed that that's a situation where we've got families that may be driving by Kellogg, and that's kind of why I've got it a little bit higher up on the stack here. It's maybe not the most preferential, but that's one of the next best options that we are looking at to get more enrollment at Harrison Park. And so out of the model, that puts us at about 590 students. And I just wanted to daylight a couple other components here that have been discussed, but we haven't looked at them in a lot of detail. So there will be a creative science grade 6 through 8 cohort. We're expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 kids over at Bridger. And we know that Bridger's a little bit of a smaller school from a capacity standpoint. And so there may be, based on how that enrollment plays out and how that use of space plays out, a conversation between Harrison Park and Bridger about where the 6-8 cohort is actually located. So if that were to occur, we'd look at an enrollment up near 740 students. And then finally, this is something that we haven't looked at with the group here in a lot of detail, but we're really just trying to think as much outside the box as we can about other places to get nearby enrollment for Harrison Park. And really the next nearest area is kind of the northeast area of Marysville. And if we were to draw the middle school boundary through Marysville, we could, by picking up the area that's closest to Harrison Park, get maybe another 35 students, not a lot. So with all those options together, looking at about 775 students. Now to the question about capture rate, I think it's really important for folks to understand that based on assumptions that are made about creative science enrollment through the lottery, in the new sort of neighborhood-based approach, neighborhood/lottery-based approach when it's at Bridger. In the model, when you look at the numbers of 270 for Clark and Vestal and 150 in the Atkinson neighborhood, the capture rate draws those numbers is about 70%. Now that is on the higher end of capture rates that we see for middle schools, for middle school neighborhood programs. And I will say that currently in the Clark and Vestal neighborhoods, we're seeing a capture rate that's closer to 50%. And I think that is in large part due to the nearby availability of the Bridger DLI Spanish program and a completely lottery-in creative science program. So we know that that has an impact. So I just want to daylight that for folks that if, we're considering this is a 70% capture rate, those are the numbers that you're looking at. Now, if you're considering a lower capture rate of perhaps 60%, which we see maybe a bit more realistic for this area, you can knock off like 40 to 50 students in that situation. So that's what the capture rate deep dive is about, is giving folks a little bit more of a sense of how that might actually play out over time as we look at other middle school neighborhood programs and how they draw out of the overall pool of middle school students enrolled in PPS programs in a given attendance area. And I do want to also say, just to the point of high enrollment at Kellogg, later in the slide deck here, and after some of the further discussion that we'll have on this piece, we have been looking at some options to get better parity between enrollment at the middle school level. How can we ensure that we don't have one school that is, has a much higher enrollment than all the other middle schools nearby? And so we'll talk through that a little bit later in the meeting. So at this point, I can take questions or whatever you'd like to do, Karina.
Yeah, no, I think that's important for people to hear, right? So not only are there strategies to increase enrollment at Harrison Park, which we'll have to get into, but there are also strategies to create more parity, right? To decrease. And that is what we will get into when we start looking at the boundary adjustments and kind of where all of those lines can be drawn to try and achieve that parity. So I know that Judy and Claire were going to address this question of kind of disparity of enrollment and what the program options were. But I also want to open it up if anyone has any questions specifically for Jed here. Jody, I see, or Josh, I created a spoonerism of your name. Josh, question.
Yeah, how did we start this meeting? By saying we finally put creative science somewhere and we don't have to worry about any more decisions. And then this shows cutting out the 6 to 8 cohort, which I thought we already got past.
Yeah, so Josh, I only showing this as something
right,
that
as
could
a
happen.
vehicle.
Yes.
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
But it's a non-starter, right? So it's not something because the whole point of the smaller middle school experience is not to co-locate, right? And so that's kind of what we had all gone through over the last 6 months leading up to this. So to see it thrown back in is really disappointing because we're trying to get numbers to match more than we're trying to get the experiences right.
Well, no, I don't think it's a numbers game. As people are hearing, it is the programs that are associated with those numbers, right? So I don't think there's a magic sauce to creating a particular number. What we're trying to say is, are there ways that we can achieve parity in the enrollment balancing of the middle schools such that we can have confidence that the experiences will be equitable for students in those schools?
Right, but it's all numbers and head count to make sure that you can get funding to hopefully get programs in the door.
Correct.
Okay.
Anybody else? Any other questions? I think the big questions are out there for you. So Marnie, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing so Judy can take over sharing. I think the big questions now are the big talking points, if you will, are for you, Judy, and for Claire.
Okay, so we've heard a lot, and we know that you're grappling with this question of how numbers and enrollment impact programs. And there's no simple answer, but I think you're right that we probably haven't given you all of the factors along the way. And I realized earlier this week that there's some baseline information that the budget department puts out every year as part of the budgeting and staffing process that if you haven't reviewed yet could be really helpful. So I think Megan is actually putting a link to a document in the chat where you can see details for every single PPS school about their population, their funding sources, the staff that's assigned there, and many other things. What I'm showing on the screen is a very brief example, and I just found 2 of the middle schools that exist now in Southeast, so you're probably familiar with these schools. And what I'd like to do is very quickly just describe on this chart what different things are. And please know that every principal and Claire and Esther and others in this room are far more experienced than I am and could write the book and answer questions. But I'm just going to, as the layperson, walk you through this to see if it helps you understand that why it's not a linear answer between number of students and program experience. Okay, so we're starting at the top and comparing Lane Middle School with Mount Tabor Middle School. And the staff, which is known as FTE, that means full-time equivalency, but it's full-time staff people. And these are instructional staff. It doesn't include the custodial nutrition services, etc. Okay, but this is the instructional staff that are go to the school and administrative staff. Look at the enrollment. You see the difference of about 281 students. Now just jump down to where you see total FTE. So there's a difference of 281 students between those schools, but instructional and administrative teams, the difference is only 4.5. It's a difference of 7.7 staff to 1 student or 13.4 to 1 student. I'm going to take you back up now to where it says % direct certification. I know that we've shared with you that that's students who qualify for free meals because they're eligible for other federal and state benefits. The difference is pretty there's a big difference between these 2 schools. Direct certification is one of several factors that influence our general fund equity formula, which you'll see that's down on the 4th or 5th row, the GF equity. It also influences Title I, which we've talked a lot about. The general fund FTE, that's that first blue line, that line is what's purely based on enrollment and section. So if you were looking at dual language immersion programs, this is actually section based. So there's a number of, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details about that right now, but that's what's mostly related to the enrollment. And you can see that it's different because the enrollment in the schools is different. But then look at where Lane picks up from funding sources that are not available to Mount Tabor, mostly because of the demographics between the school and other factors that are complicated. And that's how you see the result. So in a really efficient system, the general fund would cover most of the needs, and the equity and other funds would supplement that. The closer we get to enrollment balancing, the better chance of that happening. But along the way, there will be other funding sources that our principals use very creatively and effectively to ensure programs for students. That's why we wanted you to see this example today and hope that it helps you as you're grappling with the importance and impact of specific numbers. Claire, please chime in.
Well, first, I see Harmony has her hand up, and she used to be on our community budget review committee. So CBRC, and so Harmony, I would love to have hear your question, and maybe you've got lots of experience with our budget if you have something to share with the SCGC.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of budget questions. I have a question more about how the programmatic offerings play out at these two different schools, right? Because equity funding is different than like additional elective teachers. It can be used that way, right? But it can also be used for reading specialists and instructional coaches and TOSAs and any number of other things, right? Depending on the population of the school. So when we're trying to aim for this magic 500 number that'll provide like that robust programming offering, I'm just curious what the distinction is here, what the differences are, because we talked a lot about how Lane is under enrolled, right? And looking at just these numbers, it looks like that low enrollment is actually looks like a positive in terms of staff to to student ratio. So I think I want to dig past the numbers a little bit, right? Because we are trying to boost Lane's enrollment because they're not getting the program offerings, or that's what I've understood. And so I think this is one part of the picture, but I'm curious what if we dig past these numbers into program offerings, where the missing piece is.
So in terms of this chart, let me just speak to the chart first. The things that are not included in here, if there's a special ed focused classroom in the school, special ed services are not included in these numbers. So there's additional staffing if a school has a specialized program, a focused classroom. And then also the racial equity and social justice, you hear me say ResJ partners, those funds are centrally allocated and are also not included in these numbers. So those would be additional services. And so really what happens is the needs of our students, wherever our students are, the services and the allocation of staffing and contracted services, all those pieces follow where the students are. So Lane has a higher number of staff or a lower ratio of students to staff, and it's really because of their percentage of direct certification for free and reduced lunch. And we allocate arts and music teachers. We've just done we have a four-pronged approach with adding at our CSI, TSI, and title schools. Those are schools that need the most supports for our students. The CSI and TSI are federally designated for additional supports for students as well. And so we are allocating additional both arts, visual arts, and music FTE we've gotten through half of the district, and we have a third section coming forward next year and then the following year. So then all of our CSI, TSI, and title schools will have extra allocations for arts and music. So it is, a lot of this is meant to be used for supporting reading and writing and math, achievement for students. And there's also additional allocations that are being used because we believe that the visual arts and music are important components of lighting the light in many of our students' lives and helping them succeed at school. I don't know if that helps answer your question, Harmony.
I mean, I think it starts to get there, but I guess
Claire, Margaret said she had stuff to share too, so maybe she could speak more towards, and then I know Michael also has stuff to share. So maybe Michael, we'll go to you first because you have the direct Lane experience, and then to maybe speak to some of the program offering questions, and then Margaret will pull you up next.
Great, thank you. And Harmony, I think I would really agree with you that at this point, the funding structure for Lane works for us, that we're able to offer both robust supports for students and families, intervention and acceleration academic programs, as well as really robust arts, technology, and world language offerings. And we've been growing in that area. We have more classes in student leadership and journalism and a brand new dance program, in addition to a full-time choir and music, choir and band and art and technology program. I think where we benefit from increased numbers is in the stability of our funding sources. I think some of what we see listed in this formula here is either special circumstances or potentially time-based state funding sources. And so I think there's volatility in that budget, and it's difficult to maintain and grow programs over time. And I think that's the benefit we get from increasing our student numbers. But I think that your point's well taken, and I think there's a risk in going too far. And I think I would encourage caution in considering the impacts in increasing our enrollment and really shifting the identity of our community, because as you can see from this formula, we do benefit. There are formulas that allow us to have the resources that our community needs to have access to robust education. So I think it's a balancing act, and I would encourage caution to make sure that we find a stable point, but also maintain the funding sources that we currently rely on.
Okay, Margaret.
I think one of the things that I think Mike really spoke well to the balancing act that happens with staffing and building. So part of what we are talking about is programming and robust programming. So I think I heard Principal Rowell identify three things. One is around targeted supports for students. One is around acceleration of learning, and the other is around high interest areas, right? So what people would say is either language, that's part of what the discussion is today, and also around what we would say are electives. So as Claire mentioned, some of the high interest things that like students' interest in fire and curiosity. So I think that part of what we do when we go through a staffing process is you'll hear something about what is the core programming that we expect all schools to offer, right? And so part of what we do in the as we go through a staffing process is we say, here's what is defined as that program at the middle school level. When we started this discussion many months ago, the question was, in order to have that core program, which includes all of the things that Principal Rowell mentioned, what is a stabilizing student population that would allow, as he said, to maintain that over continuity over a number of years? And that's where the 500 student number came in. So when we talk about what is the difference between 500 and 700 students, it's a complicated answer at some level, but the core programming guides that we have for the middle grades help to equalize that expectation across buildings. And so what you're seeing here is the staffing piece, which shows up as who are you hiring to deliver that program, but the actual program itself is what we're equalizing across buildings. And so that's where the differences in school size that we thought would get to the greatest likelihood of one, equalizing the core program, but then also the sustainability, that they're not unintended cliffs that happen or changes when there's some slight variability in the actual number of students. So that's sort of what that range is and how it surfaces. And I think that back to Principal Rowell's statement about the stability of what that programming looks like and what the funding source is rounds out as we look at specific thresholds in student populations. So I don't know if that's helpful, but
yeah, I think that does help. Thank you, Margaret. I mean, I think you know, for those of us that aren't in education every day, I don't think we fully appreciate the sausage making that goes into funding FTEs in schools. It's probably one of the most complicated things you do, short of program and enrollment balancing. And so I really appreciate hearing from the principals and from you all as staff to say, not only are we trying to achieve more equity to get more stability, but then we have other levers in place that we can use to achieve the equity that we're talking about, right? Yes, we all can say we could start from a different funding model and start from scratch, but even within the model that we have levers like the general fund equity count, like the Title I, that we can leverage to ensure that we're getting equitable programming. So I appreciate that. Okay, any other questions? Beth, I see your hand up. Anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet that wants to make a comment or has a question? All right, Beth, go ahead.
Okay, I want to say I appreciate taking the time to address this. Although I feel like this comparison is a little tricky for me because we've got a Title I school and a non-Title I school that we're looking at. And the way I understand it and listening to this conversation just now is that those Title I funds and the general equity funds are going to meet specific needs that would be in a Title I school or TSI, CSI school that maybe Mount Tabor wouldn't have those needs. So even if their enrollment was the same, that staffing would still look different. Like those Title I funds would still be coming into a Title I school, and it's more about population necessarily than enrollment numbers. Like this would have been more clear to me if I was seeing between two Title I schools or two non-Title I schools, and how that would have made that a more clear difference based on enrollment to me.
I don't know that difference currently exists, Beth. That's probably why they have the numbers that they're bringing you, right? And that's why we're doing the work that we're doing now, because I think if you were to look at schools with what you're talking about, which is Title I, the more direct certification, they're going to be in the lower enrollments, right? Historically, right? And so I think that's, yeah, exactly what Claire said. When you look at our smaller schools, more are title, higher enrollment, have fewer title schools. Exactly. So I don't think that's a fair question, because you will never get those to be in comparison to each other, right? And the way that the district is increasing, that's the whole point of why we're trying to balance the enrollment, and that's what we're trying to get at here. And what you've seen from Jed is that there are levers to be able to do that, and then also levers to be able to pull when you need supplements to get there, right? Okay, so with that, Marnie, will you bring us back to our poll, please? Or not our poll, we'll get there.
Real quick, did we just refer to putting students into a program as levers we can pull?
No,
That's how it comes across.
that is not what I said. The levers that we can pull, what I was talking about were the additional funding measures. That is not what I meant. So let me clarify that. The levers that we can pull, what I was talking about, are a variety of neighborhood adjustments, like how are we doing boundaries, and then also what additional funding can we bring to bear, right? No, we are not talking about groups of kids as levers. And if that is how I stated it, I apologize. That was not my intention.
I think anytime we're talking about shifting around groups of kids in order to get, it's exactly what we're saying. So. All right, we can move on. I'll stop disrupting you.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please.
I see Eddie with his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Judy. Eddie.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is not quite a fully formulated question yet, but so my question is, because I've taught in schools that were kind of on that cusp of enrollment where, 1 year we fell below that, and suddenly our art and music teacher went part-time, which is a struggle for them as well as teachers. So my question is that 500 number, I hear like what everyone said before, and it was very clarifying, but if we're talking about Kellogg at 700, and just hypothetically, Kellogg at 700 and Harrison Park at 500, and this may be a question for the principals, you know, I'm looking specifically at like student experiences. You know, I know that there's electives that can be offered if you have enough students, right? So I'm assuming like 500 is that magic number where you can like offer art and music, but like there's some programs that you just need sheer numbers of students, you know, for example, like band or advanced art, right? So I guess I'm just want to dig more into specifics. Like if I'm a student at a 500, you know, like student school versus 700, can you like definitively say that they're going to have the same opportunities and the same electives and, you know, enrichment things like band, you know? Although I know a lot of schools have lost band for like decades, but yeah. Sorry, I know I'm kind of rehashing. I just want a little bit more like basic kind of, you know, yes or no, I guess. Or like where that number like is 500 safe, you know, like because yeah, I just want to maybe, yeah, again, not fully formulated question, sorry.
Okay. Claire, anything you can offer here?
So I think Margaret spoke to this earlier, and maybe Margaret can help me with this answer in terms of setting the size of the school at 500. She spoke to, you know, there isn't necessarily where a proposal, well, I'll speak to, there isn't necessarily a proposal that will get every school equal to each other. I mean, we would have to very surgically make very funny lines throughout the whole region to make that happen. And even then that would change as soon as you went forward 5 years. So none of this is an either or, yes or no. There are a lot of variables. There are a lot of things that shift over time. There are, you know, bubbles of kids that come in at different grade levels that move through a school, right? In terms of size, birth rates fluctuate. So all of those things will have an impact on this over time. So I think it's really important that we don't get stuck on one number with for a specific date and time, because this boundary will last much longer than the 5 year the 5 years worth of data that we've been looking at. So there will be fluctuations. You know, I've worked in this business for 30 years. I've watched fluctuations of kids come through. You look at 30 years of history of enrollment in Portland, we were big, we were smaller, we got bigger, now we're getting smaller. I mean, so it as a whole, it comes in ebbs and flows. And so what we have to do is our best now to put the best balance that we can find for both programs, and including our neighborhood programs, and looking at boundaries and keeping all the components that we have at heart, you know, in our hearts to find the best solution here. And Margaret, I don't know if there's anything else about 500 that you want to state for middle schools.
Well, I think it's like so I pulled up what our across the system, right? Like what our middle school numbers are right now. So we talk about this at every sort of grade band, right? So when we look at it, you know, in our middle schools across the system, there's a range from, you know, 360 to 754. So I think that right now, like the question is, I think the question we're really asking or is being asked is, what is a robust program, right? And so the question that you shared, Eddie, is like, is bands, right? Like, do we want 3 years of band and 3 years of choir and 3 years of art and 3 years of a DLI program? And like, so that's really what the question is, right? And so when we talk about, and we want to make sure that we have enough supports for students that need it, right? Like, so the question that is part of like, what is the defining of the core program? So does every middle school have the same arts program? No, not every middle school does. Do some middle schools have dance and other middle schools have band and other, you know, yes, that is true. And so I think that part of what the question is, do students have access to things that are going to provide them, you know, that are going to be of high interest and highly engaging, right? And so there's some variation about what that program looks like. You want a robust program that is offered over multiple years, right? I think that that's one of the things. So as we go through, what does robust mean? Is it, I think that that's what I am interpreting that to mean, is that you would have an access to, so like it could be that we're saying that all students should have access to a world language. Will all students in these schools have access to world language? That answer is yes, right? Will all students have multiple years of an opportunity to take an elective that they can pursue, right? And take like art, then take a second year, like, are there multiple levels of an elective? Like, so I think that's the type of language that we're describing about what does robust mean. And so I think it's helpful to break that apart and say that these are the details that we're talking about when we say robust. I think to Principal Rao's point, when you do that, what you need is there's a certain student population. So at 500 students, you might have like roughly 100, like if it's averages out 166 students at a grade level in a middle school. Is that enough to do the pieces that we're describing? So that was what we said. That's why we landed on a number around there. Do you get additional, like significantly more at 700 is the question, right? So that's like looking at a course catalog too across schools. The piece is, do I necessarily get more? You can, it's a trade-off. Do you have more course offerings or do you have more depth? But as you have more students, right, you have to say, how does that play out in the development? So that's depth versus breadth. There are all those kind of trade-offs that happen, but I think we just need to be really clear about what we mean about robust. And what I am hearing is that there's specific things we want to see, which is what a core program would be. And you want multiple years of development within a middle school program. So those are the two caveats I'm hearing about what robust means. So I think that that's why the number 500 is there, is that it allows those two things to happen.
Thank you, Margaret. Dr. O?
Well, I just wanted to add a little bit to what Margaret said, because part of what we consider when we talk about robust is also the adolescent development for the middle school child. We have to sort of be able to project what the future is going to hold for them and make sure that we ground them in those experiences, that no matter what they encounter in the near future, they are going to be able to find a footing that will allow them to leverage their skills and become productive citizens in society. So for example, one of the courses that they push for a lot in middle school is Project Lead the Way, Gateway to Technology, because it is foundational for a lot of engineering and STEAM courses. The other course that sometimes they push for is speech, language, and drama, because it allows you to develop self-confidence around public speaking. And, so when we talk about robust, not only do we think about the core subjects, we also think about the adolescent child and their need developmentally. And then we project that onto what society is going to require for them to do, and what businesses or what skill sets businesses would want them to have under their belts at the time of graduation.
Thank you, Dr. O. Any other questions? No, there's a lot of chatter, if you will, in the chat about the, this issue of enrollment balancing. Any other questions people want answers to? Okay. Thank you, Claire, Margaret, Judy. Okay. Marnie, will you put the slides back up again? All right. So what we're seeing now, or what we had heard, at least based on kind of our starting point last time, that we've kind of gone back and forth around, right? And what we're trying to see is there can we get to consensus around a proposal that we heard from at least principals, a little bit from some of the engagement data that Shanice reported on, of can we get to consensus around a whole school Spanish DLI model at Lent with co-location at Atkinson, Spanish DLI consolidated at Kellogg for Spanish, right? Spanish DLI. And Chinese immersion DLI at Harrison Park. So we're going to have you spend about 10 minutes, about actually 6 to 7 minutes, because we've lost some time here, in quads that Nathan will set up. Look at how quickly she changes that. And then we'll come back and we'll kind of take a pulse of where we are and continue this discussion, right? If there are questions or obstacles to consensus, we need to kind of continue to process those. So with that, Nathan, will you take us to quads? Okay. All right, everyone, we'll see you back here in a little bit. Claire, you were going to kind of round us out before we get kind of into the next step, and then we'll take a quick pulse of where we are and then return to this discussion.
So one thing I want to make sure that we're clear on is that, first of all, we need to be partners in this work about the programs and services. So as a Southeast Guiding Coalition, in your preamble to your recommendation, you can state that you recommend that Portland Public Schools ensures the programs and services follow the students and where they go to their new locations and their new schools. So adding that into your recommendation brings strength of that going forward. At the same time, as a financial leader and operational leader in this district, I also take that responsibility in terms of, as we're developing our budget and looking at what we need for our schools as they have been reassembled in, new boundaries, programs, in neighborhoods, some of them moving around, that we're making sure that the programs and services are matching up to the new demographics of the students that have come into the neighborhood schools and the programs being relocated. So it can be a partnership between the Southeast Guiding Coalition and staff, PPS, ensuring that programs and services follow the kids. So I just wanted to make sure that was really clear.
Thank you, Claire. All right. I think the other thing that, and I think Judy's put it in the chat 3 times. The district does have some options that we'll get to in terms of how to start to balance the program, the enrollment between Kellogg and Harrison Park. But we want to try and land the program placement as a starting point first. And I know that may seem hard to do, but I think that's kind of the way that we as a Southeast Guiding Coalition said we were going to do this, right? We're going to try and land that first, and then we're going to move into the adjustments with program boundaries as the second step. So with that, Marnie, will you share? Because I believe we're going to go, and giving you a heads up, Nathan, that we're going to go to the FIST to 5 poll. Because last time, we want to see where we are, right? You've gotten a lot of information tonight. So we want to hear from you in a poll that you will see here in a minute, where you stand in terms of how can I support the proposal that we just talked about, which is Spanish DLI at Kellogg, Mandarin DLI, hold on, I keep at Harrison Park, and then whole school at Lint, and Spanish existing strand at Atkinson at the K-5 level. Okay. So Nathan, if you will open up the poll. And again, if we can get SEGC members only and the representative principals to vote, and then we'll review that, and we have some time allocated for large discussion about this. Okay, we'll give it a couple more minutes. Looks like we're getting a slowdown in responses. Why don't we go ahead and close it? And share. Okay, so it looks like we have just about 3 people that are in those 0s and 1s, about 33%, so a third of the group is in the 2s, and then 33 and 24, 57%, if I did my math right, kind of in the I can accept this. So thank you. Actually, keep that up for a second, because what we want to talk about now is kind of where do we have consensus, right? So hearing from you all about, especially those of you that are in the 1s and 2s and the 0, what is it that is keeping you from coming to consensus? Like, what is the piece that we most need to address? Anybody? Raise your hand. Micah.
In our group, the question came up of how important is it right now to consider where the language programs are in high school, where they feed into, if they want to continue.
Okay. Okay. Is there
if someone could tell me, no, we'll deal with it later, we have a plan, then okay, you guys have a plan. right?
And so, maybe Margaret, you might be the best one to address that.
Mike, I just want to make sure I heard the question, right? So I apologize. What I think I heard the question is, how important is it that we know where they're going to feed to? Was that the question, or?
Correct. So yeah. Right now, I believe Cleveland High School has Mandarin, and then is it Franklin that has Spanish?
So I think that.
So we move Mandarin to Harrison Park, then everyone will need to go to Cleveland if they want to stay.
So I think the question of vertical articulation to high school for the immersion programs is the general question, right? And where are they going to be located, not only in Southeast, but across the system, perhaps, right? So that is a question that we will be looking at. That's the ensuing. So this is part of like the ensuing part that's going to happen when we go talking about high school enrollment balancing, which is coming after this. So is it important to know where that is? I don't know that it's necessarily important to that outcome is not going to, that's going to be a question mark, from this. You're not going to know that outcome at this time, right? What will be true is that as we look at high school enrollment balancing, we will take into consideration sort of how this plays out as well, right? So we'll look at where programs are located and what does that look like. And that certainly will be part of, it'll be an input into that decision-making process. But so it'll be some of what we consider at that time. But I think it becomes an input to the next process. So it's going to be an iterative process. So it will feed into that. Certainly part of the benefit I've had of listening to people talk through sort of what are the pieces of what is the value, what are people valuing, what are they thinking about as they're looking from elementary to middle school progressions, right? Like that. So that's helpful for me to hear that, and that we'll bring that forward into the next discussion and as we go. But it's iterative, and at this point, it'll serve as an input to the next one.
Okay, so, and I think that's what maybe just parents may want to know, right? Let's say Harrison Park gets Mandarin. But if you tell them, oh, you guys have to go to Cleveland to continue this, then there will be more questions on top of that. That's all. I could stop there.
Thank you, Micah. Jennifer.
Thanks, Karina. I just wanted to surface that one of the reasons that I am still concerned is because I haven't seen the boundary shifts yet or the data for elementary enrollment. And I'm still concerned as an elementary principal with the program proposals right now, that the co-location at Atkinson is going to become a single strand neighborhood. And so one of the things that we've been discussing from the beginning is really the hardship that presents for students, especially on the neighborhood side. And currently, if we were staffed for our current enrollment for next year, we would be a single strand at 5 out of 6 grades and be looking at cuts of potentially 5 out of 6 neighborhood teachers. Will that be addressed later in tonight's discussion?
I believe, so yes and no, Jennifer. Like, we had a plan to kind of get into some of those boundary adjustments and what all that looks like. I think part of the struggle that we have is that that is all predicated on some landing at some program placements, right? And so it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing that we're in now. And I don't know, Jed or Judy, if you can speak more to what Jennifer was talking about, but that's my understanding of the situation.
Yeah, Karina, I'm happy to jump in here and just say that Jennifer, in the most recent kind of working K-5 boundaries that we've got that complement the program placement that we're talking about right now, Atkinson is at 270 estimated enrollment for the 2025 school year. So like right
Does that include immersion?
It does.
Jed?
It does. Let's see. So yes, with immersion, actually it is 396. That's just for the neighborhood component.
Okay.
Which was the part I wanted to highlight for you. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have questions? And maybe, I know there's kind of some requests in the chat. And I don't know, Judy, Claire, if you want to talk about sort of the ability to kind of predict year to year what kind of the statistics and the charts that we saw earlier from Judy.
So in terms of the the chart that you saw for Mount Tabor and Lane, I would say Harrison Park and Kellogg are probably closer to Lane than Mount Tabor in terms of the demographics and what we are would see in terms of staffing. Getting it would take some time. It would not be something that we could do tonight to try and figure what that staffing would look like. And just remembering that's only for a year, and things change every year as student demographics change and students and families make choices about what program and where they want to attend, what they want to program they want to go to. So it is certainly now Harrison Park and Kellogg are both more like Lane than Mount Tabor. And with keeping Spanish DLI, Kellogg would be more like Lane. Harrison Park, I don't know the demographics as well of the Mandarin program. My recollection is that it is not as, there's a lower number of direct certifications.
Yeah.
But there's still some very there's still some elementary schools that have high direct certification in Harrison Park as well.
In that cluster.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else that was in the 0, 1s, and 2s that wants to talk a little bit about what are the pieces that are holding you up or that are keeping you from getting at least to a 3? especially some of you that are in kind of that 2 range, which was, I've got some minor issues, but they need to be resolved. Help us get you, or help us figure out what we need to do to figure out an answer to that. Anybody? Harmony.
I guess I think I'm still being held up a little. I think it's hard for me to like fully be on board with Spanish at Kellogg. It's hard for me to be fully on board. I just don't feel like I have enough information. I don't feel like we saw in E1 and E2, there are downstream consequences. The solutions that were offered to like fill Harrison Park don't feel inclusive or sufficient. And like, what about the other, in those proposals we saw under enrollment at we were looking at more than just Kellogg and Harrison Park, right? There are downstream consequences to the other middle schools. And so I think I'm just having a hard time, like, yes, let's go forward with this solution without looking at the whole system, right? Like, what does that mean for Mount Tabor? What does that mean for Lane? If we put Spanish at Kellogg, when we looked at E1, right, that's the one with, it didn't look so great at all the other schools, which is, I think, part of the reason you got that flip-flop at the end of the last meeting and why we're still talking about it. But I think that's where I'm still struggling. I just want to see the whole picture.
Thanks. I don't know, Judd, if there's any further context you can provide, but I'm thinking not, but tell me if there is.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Harmony, and yeah, it's kind of the way that that bar chart was stacked, right? There are the elements of it that I think we feel the most comfortable with to help Harrison Park build its enrollment. And then kind of as you go higher in that stack, we start to feel less comfortable about those changes. And I think that's just the reality of the tough choices that we face just based on the locations of the schools and the available students in the neighborhood. Not easy.
Yeah. Anyone else? Carmen's question, and this is for you, Shanice, is were the parents that you spoke to or the teams that you polled mostly neighborhood side, or were they DLI parents? Do you know? I think we were targeting primarily neighborhood families, but let me know.
Yes, we primarily focused on neighborhood families.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. I hear you, Andy, and that is the sort of central question, and maybe, I don't know if this is a Leah question because it impacts Harrison Park, if it's who at PPS is can best answer this question with some clarity around, does PPS feel okay, that there will be equitable program offerings at Harrison Park with the proposal that we have in front of us? And maybe Leah, because you talked about like getting at your number at like right now, I think we're at 570 or something like that, 590. What are your thoughts? Keeping where you're at.
Yeah, well, I think kind of where I'm at is looking at numbers is definitely important, but also looking at losing title funding. I mean, that's huge. And so I think we definitely have to keep that in mind. But I would say, yeah, it'd be fantastic to have some commitment that we are going to ensure that if enrollment isn't where we need it to be at first, that we can work with the district to find ways to increase that enrollment, whether that be through finding some programming that draws families in or students in. And we have some ideas around that, but just, you know, kind of saying for at least the next couple of years, we have a plan to work and be thoughtful in increasing enrollment at Harrison Park, and that we will have, you know, we will continue with funding.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. Anyone else on the PPS side want to address that?
Well, I'll just say, as the enrollment director, yes, I feel comfortable that we've come to a solution that could grow Harrison Park into a strong middle school. I'm enthused. I was at the meetings last night where Leah was describing to parents the work that's being started to improve the facility to accommodate more robust programming. I'm hearing, you know, sideline conversations about the importance of integrating the CTE at high schools, you know, into Harrison Park. And I know that's not like ready to be fully announced, but I think that community is ready to have a strong middle school, and we've seen communities support their middle schools with increased neighborhood enrollment when that happens. So I think we're on the way there. And I also really want you all to have a chance to see other ways to make sure that the rest, as Harmony said, the rest of the middle schools in the area, like other changes that could be made at the boundary level, that might balance out across other middle schools. And then maybe it wouldn't feel like Kellogg is sitting with more students than others. But I understand that this is a little truncated, but I don't know if that helps, Andy, and others who might be in that place. It's not perfect. If this was perfect, we would have been done like months ago. And I appreciate how hard you're grappling and trying to find the right answers.
Yeah, thank you.
That actually helps a lot. That to hear a direct yes on that actually helps a lot. So thank you.
Okay.
So one thing that has occurred is I've reached out to instructional leaders. You've met our deputy superintendent, Dr. Proctor, and I highlighted for her specifically Harrison Park and Lane middle schools, and working with her middle school redesign program and ensuring that Harrison Park and Lane are next on the list for receiving the benefits of a redesign process. And Principal Dickey is being very thoughtful about not announcing things that haven't been totally worked through, but it's certainly high on our list and something that we're working on very closely with the school community there and our instructional leaders. So it is certainly our intent to increase the especially around the elective career technical education components at Harrison Park is a focus, and then also doing a similar process with the Lane Middle School community. So that is something that we're looking forward to bringing to both those communities.
Okay, I'm gonna which we're following all this currently, and I'm getting frustrated. I'm going to suggest, because we're coming to closure here, that and I think I was going towards where you were, Elizabeth, which is what I want to hear from people before I make my proposal, which is that we just have a yes or no, I can support this if we can address some of these caveats, like a if and then, right? If we can address the Harrison Park pieces and the district is saying, yes, we feel confident that we can achieve this robust programming. If you can do that, can you support it? But before that, I want to be sure that there isn't anything. It sounds like what we've heard to date is the majority of the concerns that we've heard is around the middle school placement and then at the elementary school level too. I heard you, Harmony, that was about kind of this, the balancing of enrollment, right? And the programs that come with that. Is there anything else for folks that were in the 0, 1s, and 2s that we haven't heard from you tonight about what's holding you back? Is there anything we haven't heard about for anybody there? And you can put it in the chat. You can open up your mic, you can raise your hand. Okay, so it's feeling like we're at least identifying what the central issues are. And so, Nathan, if you can just do a yes/no poll for now, right? Because we do have to kind of land this program placement. And I am certainly not, we have an opportunity, we have to land it, and we have to have the final recommendation by the 17th. So if we feel like we're not there yet and we want one more meeting to be inserted between now and the 17th to kind of wrap our brains around this, we can certainly do that. But what we're trying to get to tonight is just how far away from that are we? So I'm going to say yes or no. I can, it's the best way of putting it. I can reach consensus, or I can support a plan that is loosely modeled on what we've been talking about, which is Spanish DLI at Kellogg and Mandarin at Harrison Park. If we can get some assurances about the robustness of the programs, and if we can start to have conversations about how we can achieve greater program balancing between not just the middle schools or the middle schools across Southeast, but then also what the elementary school implications are, which would be the next step that we get to. Does that seem like, can people wrap your head around that as a choice? If you can't, let me know why, or let me know.
Does that really feel like a choice? I mean, it kind of seems like we just need to move forward, right?
Well,
because no matter how many times we push back, it's going to come back to, hey, why don't we consider this exactly like this again? Right? So
I don't know. Like, I guess the question would be, if we continue to hear, nope, I can't get my head around that, then obviously we have to start at in a different position. So I don't think that's fair to say that this is being like, this is the only option that's being brought forward. What we heard today from principals and from what we're hearing from the neighborhood families that were reached out to was, this is the best proposal that they're coming up with. What we need to know from you all is, can we get you to support that plan? Okay. Nathan, will you put that together for us, please? Oh, yes, Beth.
Sorry to, so a hesitation that I'm having is, it's kind of tied to what Harmony was saying about missing the big picture. And I have this concern that, like, we vote to move this forward and then we look at the options and don't like what it takes to get there. And so then I'm wondering, is there a way to sort of see those options and then do the vote at the end?
Well, yeah, well, the meeting, yeah, I mean, we could. I think let's do it at both places. So let's see where people are right now.
Okay.
I hear you, and I didn't mean to dismiss you, Beth. I hear you. I want to get there too. We've got one more minute. We're about just a few shy from our SCGC members. A couple more. And I understand this is fully caveated. Okay. I think we're at, perhaps need one more SCGC member complete here. Yeah, the number is not changing. Nathan, so go ahead and close it. Okay. Looks like we're getting closer. Okay. All right. So now I think we've got another hour. Why don't we take just a 5-minute break, and then we can get into, like, all right, then what are the modifications, right? How do we start to look at what the program the boundary implications are to try and get to that more equitable enrollment? Okay, so we will be back here at 8:05. See you all back here at 8:05. Everyone. So before we get back to Jed, who's going to be kind of the highlight of the rest of the program, Sam, I want to be sure that I'm following around where you're having a hard time following. Is it just, can you give me I want to be sure that we're giving you what you need. So do you want to either chat me or just open up your mic and let us know what we can provide clarity around? Might not be back yet. Sam, if you're here.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I am having trouble finding the flow of data tonight. I was under the assumption that the scenarios laid out, the way it worked, it was like, here's these scenarios, and then we're going to listen to Flow Analytics talk about how those are possible, with one of those being creating a CSS K8 cohort. So I'm immediately anti those programs because it's a non-starter to me. So I put a 0 in there.
Sure.
Because, but if we're here, if that's separate and there's all these different ways to do it, then I may be amenable. But you guys have to understand the way. The way that the slides laid out, it was like this because of that, and I just need to be it. And the thing too with CTE, like I need it to be like more English and spoon-fed this late in the process, because we need to start typing out a recommendation, and the more numbers and like sausage making, helping PPS make their sausage is not, I don't want to do that. I want to create a proposal.
I appreciate that.
And so I need better, I just need it to be like said in more common sense, like language, especially when this is going to start getting laddered down to parents and stuff like that who don't listen to any of this. And so.
Right. And who have even a harder time understanding than those of you that have been dealing with this.
Some of them are us. I don't have a lot. I don't have a lot of the educational background. I'm here to help, but I just got spooked by the way that this was just sort of linearly presented.
I appreciate that. No, and I'm this is the perfect time for Jed to step in, because I think he was trying to show just some options, right? And yes, we acknowledged even going into this, like this might be a non-starter, but we know that it came up as a potential option last time in some of the groups. And so that's why it was on there. But I don't think it is, I'm not
what
sure.
I heard was an impassioned speech followed by hard data. And that was like a big sell for a particular thing. And so that you have to understand that that's the way that the data was presented to the group.
I understand. Okay. Jed, I'll let you take it from here. Do you want, I think you want slides.
We don't need slides just yet.
Okay.
So I just want to give folks a sense of how we've been working over the last week or so. So as we know, the program piece has not yet landed, although we are really, as you've heard, like running out of runway to get a recommendation. So we've been working kind of in parallel to, create boundaries, adjust boundaries that achieve the enrollment balancing as best we can based on the information that we have now about where program placements are likely to end up. And so a lot of this, if folks are, for those of you who are familiar with like the proposal codes at this point, E1 was kind of the last place that we did a lot of boundary work for folks. And E1 is the boundary piece that goes alongside the program placements that we're talking about tonight. So kind of starting with that, we've been working on a few different things here. And one of the approaches that we're using is new. It's different. It's something that we have not done in Southeast in this process yet, which is to have a middle school boundary that bisects an elementary school boundary. That is, there would be kids attending the same elementary school that would be zoned to go to two different middle schools. And so, as I understand it, that is in place in at least one other location in the district. I also want to be clear that this is not a choice zone. This is an attendance area. So I know that there was some discussion of a choice zone in last week's boundary breakout. So at this point, before I get into some of the specifics of what we looked at, Judy, is there anything else that you want to say about middle school boundaries, kind of splitting elementary schools? And this is kind of a new piece of thinking or approach that folks haven't really had any time to sit with, or just other things to say about how it's worked in other parts of the district?
Thanks, Jed. So I'll say that in our administrative directive on boundary change, the goal is to have elementary schools feed one, if possible, and no more than 2 middle schools. And as Jed said, there you haven't seen anything yet that includes showing an elementary going to 2 different middle schools. We got to this point simply because we want you to see every possible way of resolving some of these enrollment imbalances, particularly at middle schools that seem intractable in other ways. And want you to see that, yes, students that are assigned for a special program are one population, whole feeder schools could be another population, slicing boundaries across the elementaries and the middle schools, another way to do it. And here's a new way. It's not the only way. But we wanted you to have it available as you're getting close to trying to find your best balance for all these many factors.
Okay. So with that, now we are going to go to slides here. And we should be at, let's just go ahead and start at slide 23 right now. Okay. All right, so that looks like the right slide. Great. Thank you. So yeah, as I was mentioning, we have been exploring other ways to boost, in particular, Lane's enrollment without cutting Selwood's enrollment drastically. I think that we've seen that in a lot of places. This is just one example, or sorry, 2 examples of where we've done that. And actually, we are a slide ahead. No, let's go back 1 slide. I think we got bumped. I guess it's slide, yes, 22. I'm sorry about that. This is the preamble that I wanted to speak to here. As mentioned, looking at scenarios where there are these split elementaries between 2 middle schools. So the pro with this is that it's going to allow us to better balance middle schools without squeezing those elementary schools below that, below the targets 270 that we're trying to maintain here, right? Because what we often see is if we're trying to keep a school in an attendance area in a middle school feeder pattern, we're struggling to keep it the right size and balance what's going on both at the K-5 and the grade 6-8 levels. Now, the obvious con here is that students attending that same elementary school, they would be assigned to a different middle school, right? And that's something that we have not seen, at least recently, in Southeast Portland. And so I wanted to give one example here that's based off from, what we've been talking about with the Kellogg and Harrison Park program placements. And that is a situation here that looks probably the most viable for bringing Kellogg's enrollment down to something that's a little bit more similar to the other middle schools. And so we saw an opportunity and an example to look at this a little bit by experimenting with a Kellogg Lane boundary that's at Foster Road. And that would split, in this case, our LEDA in the most recent version of the working K-5 boundaries that we've got to accompany these program changes. And so that does shift about 110 kids from Kellogg into Lane. And that would get Lane's enrollment up to around 570. And it also allows us to keep Lewis as a Selwood feeder and keep Selwood's enrollment above 500. So that's an example. We do have maps that we can show folks of that, the detailed statistics that would go along with that. But I just wanted to share that with folks as a concept to start here. Next slide. So here's just a couple of other things that we looked at. Again, this was more specific to the issues that we've seen with Selwood's enrollment being cut pretty drastically when we try and bring more students into Lane. So a couple options that we looked at here. The first is actually does not involve splitting any elementary schools to two middle schools. It is instead feeding Woodstock's neighborhood to Lane instead of Hosford, which is what we've seen in previous versions that support this program placement. It would also have Lewis stay as a feeder to Selwood. And if we were to make this switch here, again, based on the most recent working K-5 boundaries, that would put Lane enrollment at about 600 and Selwood at about 530. We do see here that Hosford's enrollment drops to about 480. And this does not have anything to do with Kellogg. So Kellogg still remains around 700 in this situation here. The next option, focusing in on Lane and Selwood, would be to split the Lewis neighborhood between Lane and Selwood middle schools. So back to this concept that we were just talking about of a school going to two middle schools or being zoned for two middle schools. In this case, at 45th Avenue, which is about down the middle of that attendance area as it's drawn in the most recent working boundaries that we've got to support this program placement. So that puts Lane just over 500 at about 520, but we see that Selwood is still not quite hitting that 500 mark. It's a bit better than we've seen it in previous versions that supports this program placement, where Selwood was down around 400. So just a couple options that we've been looking at here to help us get past that. I do want to again highlight with that second option, it doesn't change any of the boundaries for Kellogg, so it again remains at 700. Really you'd have to go back to the previous slide to consider some options that do better to smooth out some of that enrollment. But again, it's a new approach that folks haven't had a lot of time to think about or see. And we do have, like I said, some maps that are ready to be shared out with folks as soon as tomorrow. And if we have time tonight, we can get into that if there's, if we still have time for breakout rooms, given the conversation so far.
Question for you, Judd. Is there anything that supports increased enrollment at Mount Tabor?
So we haven't looked at anything specific like that. I think that if we're completely opening up the playbook here with middle school boundaries that split elementary schools, that approach could be used as well to help smooth out some of that boundary there. Again, with Kellogg being the school with a high enrollment and Mount Tabor being a school that shares a boundary with Kellogg, there could be a space for that to occur to smooth out some of that.
Yes, Christy, yes, let's get clarification on the CSS location on the proposal we are being asked to vote on. So I believe E1 shows CSS going as a K8 in its entirety, right, to Bridger. She says.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is the same K8 model as it is currently at Clark.
Right.
Moved to Bridger, with the difference being that there is now an attendance area that enrolls part of it and a lottery that enrolls another part of the program.
Yeah, and so did you have a question about that, Christy?
Yeah, I think I'm just starting to get some questions. I had assumed the proposal we were voting on was K8 at Bridger. It didn't say that explicitly, but I think the slide where it talked about being at Harrison Park has created a lot of questions, and it didn't say anything explicitly in the polls. It just talked more about the DLI placement. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that was, we kind of got a little bit ahead of our skis, I think, in terms of presenting ways to get Harrison Park up, which was one of those suggested ways, but that was not inherent in the base model, which has it going as a K8 to Bridger. I think the other piece was if I remember correctly, Jed, the splitting of Marysville, which is what you're talking about, and potentially picking up 35 or 40 students that way to get them to 625 without the CSS change, right?
Yep, you got it. So really the core of what we've been talking about is the Clark, Vestal, and Atkinson neighborhoods, as well as Chinese DLI. That gets us in our estimate to about 590 students, with the caveats that I had around, we don't know exactly what the capture rates are going to be for those neighborhood components, right? So those are the numbers that we see there. If folks were feeling like, that doesn't get us far enough, like these are the other options that are on the table that, as we've heard, are not the most desirable of options, but those are the other nearby students to Harrison Park. So I would just lop it off at that 590 mark, and that's what we're talking about right now with what folks are being asked about.
Okay. Any questions for Jed before we talk about kind of next steps tonight? Question is there a data packet that corresponds with these ideas? I don't think there is, that you do. You have one and we can get it out to the group.
Yep.
Okay. I think it was one that was just developed today, so that is why we didn't get it to you sooner. I believe that is a fair statement, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. We didn't want to dump all this information on folks and then ask them to do something with it before tonight. We wanted to introduce it, especially the fact that you haven't heard anything about middle school boundaries that split elementary schools.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions? Was the example, Jed, I mean, you can read here, on the earlier slide about splitting our lead at Foster, another one of the options for increasing lane?
Yeah, that does, not only does that increase lane and reduce the need to have Lewis as a feeder to lane, it also creates a bit more parity between Kellogg and the rest of the middle schools.
Okay. Any other questions from the group for Jed? Okay, so now I think, and Nathan, hopefully you're hearing me here. We've got about a half an hour. So do you all want to just stay in the large group? So this is going to be the poll. Stay in large group or go into small groups, Nathan, because we want to understand how to best use this. We were a little bit reluctant to put you into small groups to kind of process this because it was so new. But we can go into small groups and process it in a way that there will be a flow person in every room and there'll be a subject matter expert in every room. But the hope is that we can kind of pare down the sizes of the folks having the conversation to give more people some airtime. Nathan, sorry. Small groups, large group, poll. One second, he's getting there. Yes, Jed or Judy, can you put the link to the data packet in the chat?
Yeah, we haven't posted it up yet.
Okay.
If we do go to small breakout rooms, or I can show folks it in the large room if that's the way that we end up going. We can do it that way.
I mean, I'm really thinking we should go to small groups, but all right, everybody, give us your thoughts on this. Everybody, yep. Oh, interesting. Okay. We can probably end it here. We don't even have share results. We're about almost 80% in our river rooms. So I think we're going to do that. So we're going to, Nathan, if you can take us to our river rooms, and each room will have a flow representative that will be able to share the data packet on the screen. All right, everyone. We'll do just a quick, we know we're running out of time here, but we did want to do kind of a quick round robin of what we heard in those rooms. So we'll start with Clackamas. Judy.
Yes, because I was in Clackamas with you fine people. Yes. Even though I was putting notes in Columbia. Good discussion about proximity. So noting that we've got Atkinson community virtually bypassing Kellogg to get to Harrison Park, and they don't have a closer school, but we're looking at proximity as a factor in maybe, assigning some kids who are currently part of Kellogg down to Lane. So proximity is not applied equally everywhere. A note about these changes that we are under discussion potentially for Arleta and Marysville and the split feeder, and a lot of change stacked up on top of each other. I think that's good language, Sandra, of that stacking and the intensity of that. And noting that actually some of the splits appear to, based on geography, maybe make some sense, but and also that one of them keeps Lane with a socioeconomic status close to its Whitman-Woodmere feeders, but we don't have a lot of experience with these splits, so people don't know a lot about it, and there were definitely some questions, wanting to see some of the metrics in the data. And I think also a discussion about like getting ready for these program changes and trying to figure out like put a stake in the ground on some of the things that are needed to make program changes happen well. Those were the big things that stuck out to me. Any others that I missed?
Anyone else from our group? I think that sounded like a good synopsis. And what you wrote in the Columbia room, well, do they just get shared by that room? So Columbia.
And I wrote our comments on the one below, actually, Columbia, but yes, there you go. Sorry, thank you. A lot of discussion around being concerned about the split feeder of Arleta, and that, and in general, there was a comment about kind of our high level goals, even going back to phase 1, and like one of those was not splitting feeders, and concern that it seemed like maybe we'd given up on that goal in order to kind of reach the finish line. Concern about the disruption that might cause students, and particularly neighborhood students, in order to keep the Spanish DLI program at Kellogg, that would have resulting effects to neighborhood students in Arleta. And let's see, questions around how balanced the split would be between Kellogg and Lane, especially in scenarios F1 and F2. It was confirmed, or it was clarified rather, that there'd be about 100 that would go to Lane and 30 to go to Kellogg, and the observation that a more balanced split might be more amenable. And let's see, a question about the impact of perhaps having a full spectrum of special education services at the middle school level. Maybe that could also have the effect of bringing more students to middle schools and getting the numbers above that 500 threshold. Let's see. And then, an understanding that if we're working around the assumption that the Spanish DLI program will be at Kellogg, there will be trade-offs, but there's some frustration about that the staffing information wasn't presented sooner in the process, that would have helped to know that earlier on. And concerns about demographic changes that might be associated with these scenarios and loss of Title I status at schools like Lane.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah. Anyone else from Columbia? Okay. Last but not least, Marnie, will you share some thoughts on? Oh, look at you! You were able to bring a bunch of stuff in. Go ahead.
Screenshotting Jenny. So we talked a lot about some of these areas that are being split, going from where this boundary is and what its repercussions are. And also I believe it's this one in Woodstock, this small sliver that's below, and kind of questioning this, that slice there. And then we talked about, Jenny shared that these are cascading changes. So if you adjust a boundary here, it sometimes goes clockwise, sometimes goes counterclockwise. And it's just all the way around affecting everything. I'm looking at the time, wondering if one of these three would negatively impact title funding more than another. We also talked about that this is going to be more information that we will share, that Flo will share with all of you. This is just sort of a preliminary look. Talked about South Tabor and the boundaries in there, that it's splitting neighborhoods. Why are we going to move more Marysville to Arleta? Could it just be split to Lane? I think I got that right. The other one was, there is lots of new multifamily housing going up right along Woodstock Boulevard, and that's going to impact the numbers at that school. Did I get all of these?
Anybody else from that room? Anything else?
I feel like I'm missing one. The last one that you shared, Andrea. Oh, it's that that the school that it just got moved, and why are we asking them to do it again? Arleta just was moved, and it's a lot to ask of them to do it again in a year, to have that happen again.
Okay. So I think what we probably, so thanks, Marnie, if you'll stop sharing. So I think what makes sense is for us to just kind of make some closing announcements. I think we should plan on office hours or co-chair corner this coming week, right? I think we need to talk about whether or not we have an opportunity to, do you all feel like you need one more meeting between now and the 17th? That would make it next Thursday, I believe, I think is the proposal, to bring this one home. If we can send out all of the information that Flo is prepared to date tonight, or that they've prepared tonight out tomorrow. How do people feel about, guess what, Nathan? Get one more on the fly poll. Are people willing to add another meeting next Thursday to really get into the details of kind of boundary work and land our program placement? Or do we just want to stick with our last meeting, which is our meeting scheduled currently for the 17th? So the question is, are you okay to add another meeting next Thursday? Because we want to be sure that if we add one, we want to get the majority of people that we can there. Micah.
I thought we were going to talk about, or the SCGC could propose about legacy policy, because I know that a lot of parents, especially we're splitting neighborhoods and schools. I think a lot of parents, from I'm hearing, is they at least want to know what the legacy policy is going to be, or the grandfathering in.
Mm-hmm. And Judy's shaking, nodding her head. So I think the answer to that is yes. You do get to inform, at least make a recommendation for that. Okay. Yes, no poll is ready. All right, bring it. All right, we're getting close to our group, our SCGC group. I think we can close it. All right, so about 60-40 is where we are with that. So we definitely want to talk about the co-chair. Would more people be interested in a noon, evening, or co-chair? Chat looks like a lot of, or at least some noons to date. So I think we've got a co-chair corner that we're going to do, and then we'll talk about whether or not we will. I mean, we've got the majority saying they're willing to meet, but I want to be sure that we feel comfortable that we can have a good representation join us next Thursday before we calendar that. So thank you for your time tonight. We know this is hard. I will leave it to you, Dr. Rowe, to close us out.
Well, thank you all again for your engagement tonight. I know that we are almost at the tail end of this process, and of course, the decisions still need to be made. So the fact that you're staying along with our conversations and continuing to think about how we can balance our schools and our programs is really great. On behalf of the district, I do want to extend our greatest appreciation and gratitude. We hope that the information shared tonight, of course, will help us or move us closer to making a decision in 2 weeks. I think that's a great idea to add one extra meeting, because I think there was a lot of unfinished business, at least in our room. And I think that people would benefit from those conversations. Again, we'll continue to post our recordings on our website. You know how to access all the materials. And if there's anything else that you need, please feel free to email Judy. Thank you so much again. Please do not forget to complete the feedback form. Your feedback form gives us information and gives us some direction and guidance on how to prepare and plan for the upcoming meetings. Have a great night, stay safe, and we will see you again in a week, hopefully.